I am Akiva Hoffman. If you haven't seen me before, that's how I'm known in writing world and on Twitter and so on. And I am one of the co-facilitators of the Speculative Wisdom book club that meets on Zoom. And we are really excited to have Sim Kern with us. I'll talk a little bit about the plan for this session, and then I'll hand it over to Sim. What we like to do during introductions, and I'll have Sim do this as well when they introduce themselves, is to give a little visual description to improve visual access. So I am a rather fair-skinned white person. I use they, them pronouns. So I'm kind of genderqueer. I have cat eye glasses and earrings that you probably can't even see. I have an undershave haircut of kind of light brown hair. It's kind of long on one side, non-existent on the other. And I'm wearing a sort of cerulean colored t-shirt. And behind me, I have a virtual background of a bunch of my favorite books. What we'll do is some planned questions that I have for Sim, and also take questions from people who have joined us on Zoom. So please put questions into the chat at any point in this discussion, and I'll try to work those in. I see some more people showing up. That's great. So yeah, drop your questions in the Zoom chat. And we'll work them in, and we're recording this. So set your screen name for whatever you want it to be in case it shows up on the recording. And that will go up on the Congregation Tehillah YouTube channel. And Sim, we encourage you to use it, wherever you want to share that around in the future. In terms of content warnings, the books we're discussing talk about trauma, reproductive trauma specifically, domestic abuse, grief, dying ecosystems, extinction, medical horror, and transmisia. There might be some other things that I missed, but it's kind of a wide range here and some serious topics. So just want everybody to be aware that those may come up in this discussion today. And Sim, go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a little visual description as well.
Sure. So I'm an author. I'm originally from Chicago, but I'm now I've been living in Houston half my life. I am the author of Depart to Part, which is what we're here to talk about. I think we're also going to talk about my new short story collection, Real Sugar is Hard to Find. I also have a young adult novel coming out in November called Seeds for the Swarm. It's also, all those books are focused on issues like climate change, particularly lots of it, how it affects the Gulf Coast and Texas generally. Queer identities, and Depart to Part really focuses in on my Jewish identity as well. And I'm a white person with a fade haircut. I'm wearing an orange t-shirt. I have freckles, and behind me is some books and plants.
Awesome. So something that we did when we discussed Depart to Part, because there was a dibbook in the book, we had like a funny icebreaker question that I want to ask you as well. So we were talking about the difference between dibbooks and Ibor. So the Ibor, as you've probably read, is kind of like the positive version, like the being possessed essentially by a righteous person's soul to aid you. And if we were to hypothesize a world where that actually happened, who would you want to be possessed by? Somebody dead that,
I mean, I don't like the idea of like being totally possessed by anybody, but if they can kind of just come and go and hang out with me, oh geez, that's a level of intimacy and vulnerability. Probably like Ursula K. Le Guin. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I would like to have Ursula K. Le Guin like whispering in my ear, probably. That's my fiction writer answer.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I could see some real advantages there. So, yeah, could we start off maybe with some excerpts? We'll talk a bit about Real Sugar is Hard to Find. I've been reading it. Lots of great stories in there. I think people in this group would really enjoy it. There's one called The Listener that in my copy, it's pages 39 to 41, but I know in your copy, it's probably on different pages.
It'll be totally different.
Yeah.
Just tell me which part.
It starts with one afternoon, Delia announced she wanted to experiment.
Oh, yeah.
A couple pages. It's like kind of like that to to where it says things were different with Delia. That's the last sentence in that section. Yeah,
sure.
you just read that to us, give people a feel for that story.
Okay, so I'll just set it up for people. Ooh, that's kind of, wait, hold on. All right, so to set it up, basically, this main character, Jane, the story is historical fiction set in 2008, which was the year of the worst drought in Texas history. 300 million trees died. And it was also like the height of like the Sim Kern era. So Jane and her best friend Delia are Sim kids. They've got like the raccoon hair stripes, you know, that whole subculture. And Jane has been kicked out of her house by her mom. And she and Delia and Delia's boyfriend, Ricky, take mushrooms in the woods where there's supposed to be a rave. They never find the rave. And Jane ends up gaining this ability to talk to trees. And at first she thinks that it's just because she's still tripping and the drugs aren't wearing off. But it's now several weeks later and she can still hear trees talking in her head. So one afternoon, Delia announced she wanted to experiment with me, not in the way I was hoping. We walked around her neighborhood as I translated the trees for her. On the first block, every tree was happy chanting. But when we turned the corner, a wailing grated along my spine, so shrill I wanted to turn and run. That one, I pointed. What's wrong with it? Delia asked, moving closer. It's in pain everywhere. Its bark hurts, its roots hurt. It's very, very thirsty. Delia stopped beneath the tree and looked up into its canopy. I didn't know then that it was a black walnut with thousand cankers disease, but I knew those dark splotches on its bark were bad news. Come on, she said, skipping up to the front door and ringing the doorbell. The woman who cracked open the door glared up and down at Delia. Rainbow-colored raccoon stripe hair extensions, Emily the Strange tee, and a plaid miniskirt. Excuse me, ma'am, Delia said in a bubblegum lilt. We were wondering if you knew your tree is sick. The woman's frown deepened. Is this some kind of prank? No, ma'am. My friend here, her dad is a biologist, Delia lied. So she knows stuff about trees. The woman started to close the door. The tree wailed in pain. Look, whatever you're selling, I'm not. See these black spots on the trunk? I interrupted. They mean your tree is dying. She stuck her head back out and looked at the tree, blocking the rest of the doorway with her body, like she expected us to shove past and rob her. Huh, she said after looking for a few moments. I guess it always hasn't been like that. I'll call someone out to take a look. Delia skipped as we rounded the next corner. What an old bitch, she said. But hey, you helped that tree. You're like that dog whisperer guy, only a tree whisperer. Listener. What? Never mind. Come on, let's find more trees to save. We informed a confused middle schooler that he should tell his mom the sycamore out front needed its dead branches pruned. In an overgrown lot, we ripped down a morning glory vine that was strangling a plum sapling. But as we headed down Laurel Street, a sudden wailing from behind a high wooden fence shook my spine so intensely I doubled over. What is it? Delia asked. I don't know, I choked, sinking to the sidewalk. The tree beyond the fence was too sick to do anything but wail in pain. Whatever's back there, it's dying. Delia jumped up, grabbed the top of the fence, and scrambled her feet against the wood to peer over. After a moment, she jumped back down, out of breath. There is a bushy thing back there that's got mostly brown leaves. Her voice sounded distant. I pressed my hands to my ears, though it did nothing. The tree's voice was inside my skull. Should we knock? She asked. It's too late to help it. I shook my head. I have to get out of here. I can't take this anymore. I started smacking my head with my palms. Shut up, shut up. Delia grabbed my arms and pulled me into a hug, and I must have hugged back too tightly. I must have hugged wrong, because after she helped me stand and hurry away, after I couldn't hear the tree anymore and I'd wiped the tears from my eyes, Delia cast a cold side eye in my direction. How did you know, she asked quietly, that the tree was there? Well, it told me, I said, like all the others. Yeah, but we could see the other trees. We could see what was wrong with them. Her voice was so distant. Oh my God, did you like crawl over that fence last night? Are you pranking me? No, I just listened to it like all the others. I hated how she looked at me then, like she had no idea who or what I was. That's the section.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the way a lot of these stories weave like near past or near future and kind of, play with the dimensions of reality a little bit to kind of bend things. There are quite a few stories about reproductive trauma and some regarding forced reproduction or, seeking to, seeking an abortion and stuff like that. That I wanted you to read a section from The Propagator, but I was just thinking some of these sounded like they could be kind of hard to write. How do you like, in terms of process and stuff, like how does that work for you? I mean, I think you mentioned that writing is a way of processing trauma, but also like, and what kind of response have you gotten from those two?
Yeah, this Propagator was one of the hardest to write. It's like the angriest story in this collection. It is about forced birth. And it was written obviously before Roe v. Wade was overturned in Texas at a time when, though, I mean, we knew that these rights were under attack and not going to be ours for a long time. And I had like a really difficult pregnancy and birth with my child. And so just was feeling very raw about not having a choice around those things. So, and I have a lot of friends who work in abortion access and stuff. So yeah, for me, it's a way of like getting the poison out sort of and talking back to it. I mean, I do believe that fiction is a form of activism. I don't believe that on its own, it's like enough, but I think that if you're like an engaged activist fiction writer, then those two things are both serving each other. So like my activism definitely, like my real world activism definitely has informed my fiction like so much, like so many of those themes and experiences end up coming into my stories. But I think, everything is a culture war, and the culture war is shaped by narrative. The policies that we end up implementing in this country are ultimately shaped by narrative. And like the forced birth advocates have been selling a very convincing narrative to a lot of people for a long time and building a lot of political power around that narrative. And they are currently winning. So writing stories that push back and, set a different narrative, it's really important work. And so, sometimes it is not like the most fun thing to write about. It's not writing is not usually escapism for me. Some of the stories, there's like a couple utopian stories in this collection that are, but even those are engaging, even though they're utopian, they're sort of painful to write in a different way because they're painful in that they're a reflection of the way things aren't and all of the way things could be if we lived more, kindly and logically and things like that. So did that answer your question?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I actually was thinking how I appreciate, while it can be painful content, it's good to have people talking about birth and the trauma that can surround birth and so on, because so often, unless someone's been through it or knows someone close to them that's been through it, there's this mystique about, it's so wonderful, and no matter how hard it is, you'll just feel great afterward because you've brought a child into the world and everything's great. And it's like, it really changes people's lives, and it can be traumatic in multiple ways, physically, emotionally, other things. It's important to have people talking about that. I guess it would be nice if maybe more people had, read the label before, pursuing things.
Oh, yeah.
There's a just the awareness. It feels like a hidden knowledge that a club of people that only get admitted after something happens. So.
There's a horror story in this collection on Whole, which is sort of a supernatural horror, but based on my experiences like post-birth and finding out like I had to have multiple surgeries and was in and out of the hospital and was bedridden for months and disabled for a year and lost my job and all this stuff. So it's kind of turning all that into like a horror story, but there's so much like just infantilizing of the main character of the protagonist. And they're not being told anything. They're not, none of the doctors are being straight with them. And they're just sort of observing all these spooky things happening around them and realizing more and more that like something is terribly wrong with them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a thing where medical horror can be very convincing, because it's, even though it's, turned up a notch or taken to a different direction, it's like, yeah, people have experiences like that.
Yeah.
So if you could read from the propagator,
Sure.
the section starting with, after I gave her that first pothos, I told Danny, etc., until the end of the section where it's got the 3 asterisks. I guess it's called a dinkus. I didn't even know there was a word for it, but that's what publishing people call it, apparently.
That's pretty far into the story.
Yeah. So this is a future where, is it fair to say like a Monsanto-like corporation is preventing people from growing their own plants? It's like illegal or something.
Yeah.
So.
Is that the start of a section break?
I think it might be near a section break. Yeah, after I gave her the first pothos.
If you can find the
page 68 on mine, I'll see what is near. I can grab it on my reading app. Yeah, it is after a section break.
What's the section break that is closest to?
There's a few days after I met Danny. Tonight I take the new grow light Ethan made me, and then.
Oh, okay, I found it.
You got it. Cool. Yeah,
okay, yeah.
Section.
So what's happened is the main character works for like this Monsanto-like corporation, and in this world, like even propagating house plants. So Houston is completely flooded. So there's just water, everything, and the city is just kind of built up. It's still based around the petrochemical industry. It's just this like flooded petrochemical complex. And so soil is really like at a premium, and there's no laws have been passed around like people having access to a certain amount of green space, because it's just this like horrific petrochemical flooded nightmare. And so soil and plants are like leased. And if you want a house plant, it's like leased to you through Monsanto. You can't actually own it. Like regular people can't afford to own plants, and propagating any kind of plant or, starting your own plants from seeds is illegal. So this employee reveals that sort of her how far you want me to read, Sol?
Just that section.
Okay. Her kind of backstory and motivation was that she was forced to give birth. So there's this like tightly controlled reproduction, both of plants and of like human sexuality. She was forced to give birth to a baby who had craniorachiescesis, which is an unsurvivable birth defect where it's actually in the news this week. Like there's someone who has a form of rachiscesis who's being forced to carry her baby whose skull won't close to term. So this was, something that we foresaw with these laws that they were trying to pass. And basically this has made her really, really angry. And so she steals some soil and some plants from her corporation, and she starts propagating them in like behind the walls of her apartment. So after I gave her that first pothos, I told Danny to tell her friends about me. Word spread that there was a lone woman with a black stroller who hung out in the botanical gardens on weekends who would give some green to any plantless parents. I delivered the plants to their homes directly, tucked inside the stroller. A few times I ran into police checkpoints. They never asked me to open the UV shield, an absurd bit of luck. In the homes of my clients, I accepted their lukewarm mugs of coffee and instructed them in proper plant care. I told them to hide the plants away in a back room to avoid the suspicion of neighbors. Every time I knocked on a client's door, my heart was in my throat, never knowing whether I'd been set up, whether agents from Verdicorp were waiting inside with handcuffs. And then one afternoon, sitting on a bench in the botanical garden, someone approached me who didn't seem to be a parent. No kids in tow, nose ring, striped shaved head, anarchist tattoos crawling up their tanned arms, and spider legs drawn around their sharp cornered eyes. I had never been approached by a non-parent before. Would I give green to just anybody? Was it worth the risk? I was doing this for the kids, right? If I gave to one punk, how many more would come? Marisol, they sat right next to me. My heart rate spiked. Besides Danny, I'd been careful never to tell clients my name. I'm sorry, do I know you? We have a mutual friend. They raised their eyebrows meaningfully. Lilith? A friend of Lilith's. A friend of Lilith's. The phrase stuck in my mind like a half-remembered nursery rhyme. It meant something high school kids giggled about. Anarchist slang, maybe. I couldn't remember. I'm sorry, you have the wrong person, I said, moving to stand. Their hand clamped over my wrist, their voice urgent. Lilith knows about Milo, what you had to do. I sank back down, fighting to keep my face impassive. Lilith helps people who are like you were. Suddenly it clicks. Friend of Lilith. She's gone to see a friend of Lilith. That's what kids would say when someone met a doctor at a sunken home late at night. She tried to visit Lilith. That meant one of our classmates was in the hospital for eating a box of laxatives or digging inside themselves with an unbent coat hanger. They waited for a clump of screaming kids to run by to whisper, "We know you're a grower and we have some flowers that need growing. You can help Lilith in her work." They pressed a twist of paper into my palm and stood abruptly. "We'll be in touch." I was supposed to feel horrified. I was supposed to flag down the nearest police officer and report them, but I didn't. And by the time I thought to ask, "How do you know I'll help you?" they had already disappeared down the crowded path towards the desert biome. I peeled back one corner of the paper and peeked. Inside were half a dozen tiny black seeds.
Thanks. Yeah, so hopefully that gives people a good taste for some of the stories in Real Sugar is Hard to Find. And please check it out if you're interested in more of this climate fiction stuff. We should talk about Depart a little bit because we read that as a group. And we're just kind of curious, when writing that, how much did you get to draw on your own experiences versus friends' experiences versus research? I mean, Houston is still above ground at the moment. So that I'm sure there was some research. It
wasn't though during Hurricane Harvey.
Right.
It really wasn't.
Regularly, from what I understand. My parents visited people there and ended up in a flooded streets, 2 decades ago or something, But,
yeah. So I've lived in Houston since 2007 and lived through multiple major hurricanes, Hurricane Ike and Hurricane Harvey being the most devastating ones. This book was mostly based on my experiences of Hurricane Harvey and also the knowledge of Hurricane Harvey was really, really bad, but we're still waiting for the big one. Hurricane Harvey was kind of a weak storm. It was just so deadly because it parked itself over the city. We were on the wet side of the storm and then it just stalled out. It was not fast moving. It just stuck around for 4 days and it dropped and the quantity of water dropped on the city. It's trillions of billions of gallons or so. I mean, it's just an unfathomable amount of water. It caused the city, just the entire peninsula to sink. And so Depart was kind of imagining in some ways we really got lucky because we did not get a direct hit. Harvey was not a direct hit to the city. Even Hurricane Ike was not a direct hit. If we do have a direct hit to the city, it's just because of all the petrochemical industry here. It's just a catastrophic environmental disaster on the level that's never been seen. Possibly worse than Fukushima. We do have, it could be really, really bad. And there's really no plan in place. And we're celebrating the 5-year anniversary of Harvey. And there's still been we've done over a 10-year anniversary of Hurricane Ike. And we still haven't built the Ike Dike, which people have been talking about for 10 years that would protect the city from a hurricane. So there's also these 2 dams west of the city that almost failed during Harvey. And if they would have failed, the entire city would have been completely submerged, all the way to downtown. So that Depart was kind of imagining, okay, what happens when the big one actually does hit and when we don't get lucky, and the city really is wiped out. But that's kind of just, the setup for the book. And then most of it is that it's the experience of being a climate refugee and being evacuated somewhere. I was not in a shelter after Hurricane Harvey. I was staying with my in-laws, and my in-laws are diehard Trump Republicans. They live north of the city in very red country. And I was feeling just extremely vulnerable being there. I had recently come out as trans and I'm staying with these relatives where I feel like I have to completely hide that entire part of my identity with them. I had just given birth like 4 months ago. And like I said, it was like this really traumatic birth. I was like on a lot of drugs. But my involvement was actually with the shelters was actually the school that they like set up that I was a part of. So in the day, like the day after the rains ended, like on Facebook, me and a couple teachers were like, we want to help. People need daycare. Let's figure this out. So it ended up, we were a group of hundreds. I think we had like over 400 teacher volunteers. We just put this together in like a few days, and we were running daycares and schools, led by certified teachers in the major shelters, and at some of the smaller shelters around the city. Just kind of doing like lesson plans on like, social emotional processing and just fun activities so that parents could drop their kids off with certified teachers, who have had a background check, and it'll be safe, and they could go do what they need to do. We were also like, there's the example of like, they're trying to find headphones for a kid with autism. Like that was something we were doing, like finding, needs that people had in the shelters. And so because I couldn't actually go to the shelters, but I ended up in like this administrative role coordinating this entire effort because I was like bedridden and I was like stuck way north of the city.
That's amazing.
For a couple of weeks. So yeah, so all of those elements of the story were like very real and from like real stuff that was happening after Hurricane Harvey and things that came up, in the shelters.
That's so neat. It's amazing the way that nowadays people can be involved and play a role, because administration is work. It's not usually seen much, but yeah, that's very cool. One aspect of Depart that some folks in our group found painful was how ultimately none of the older white people were good to the transgender characters. Like it seemed like a pretty stark generational divide, and we had some discussion around that because some of us saw this as kind of like a cautionary tale, like don't be like these people, and other people are like, but that's not what I experienced in my queer community, and I wasn't treated that way in person. So try to think of what question we have related to that, but maybe what do you feel younger trans and queer folks need from older folks, and how do you think intergenerational dynamics could be improved maybe?
Yeah, so David and his partner, that betrayal, right, of when they just ditch Noah. I mean, that is a pointed message of warning to white cis gay men, like, do not abandon us. Because they do. I mean, politically, a lot of white cis gay men, they usually have class privilege, right? Over all other members of like the LGBTQ family. And they also are in greater proximity to white supremacy. And they know that, there's a lot of like Republican white gays and stuff. So it's like saying, don't leave us behind, I mean, don't leave trans people behind, don't leave queer people of color behind, because you can save yourselves and just like get out. But in the end, I mean, I really believe in the message of the book is that community and sticking together and solidarity is what will save us. God, I forget the name of this is so embarrassing. The name of
That's
the
okay.
woman,
Every author has a thing. Like I know I wrote this a long time ago, but it's been a long time.
This is the woman who runs the Seder.
Oh yeah, the woman at the synagogue or whatever.
Yeah, they have.
Yeah, I don't remember her name.
Or not the Seder.
It's just a Shabbat service or something. Yeah.
Anyways, she's just like real. I mean, my experiences with older white Jewish queers have not, as older white Jewish cis het people have not always been super supportive, especially of like trans stuff. That is like a direct quote that like I have received. The like trans people are like mutilating their body and it's God's creation.
Sorry to hear that. I mean, I know there are people like that out there, but
I'm sorry. I'm sure the people in this group are not like this, but it is real life that there are a lot of people who unfortunately like have those attitudes. So yeah, I think, to be in solidarity with young trans people, just be in solidarity with us and listen to us and don't abandon us. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I hope texts like this can get in the hands of people and do some of that 101, maybe for folks that are like, oh, is that how that comes across? Like, because it should be obvious. I don't know. But yeah, I'm curious. I want to check in with the attendees. Did you have questions about Depart specifically? Because we could talk about being trans in Texas, which I had some questions about, but I wanted to encourage people if they had questions or things they wanted to bring up that they hadn't put in the chat yet. Feel free to comment or say something. Carla, yeah. So Susanna wants to know about Carla, at the lesbian bar.
Yeah.
Who's
yeah, well, she represents. I actually have never had it pointed out that, all of the older white people are villains. So that's interesting. And I should unpack that. Carla is, yeah, she is predatory. She's like a transactional sort of thinking person and is like, what can I get out of these people? And who, I'm only interested in saving people who can benefit me in some way, in this case, like sexually. Or they seem young and cool, and Elena seems like older, and it's not clear if it's like a race thing or a generational thing, but Carla is not interested in hosting all three of them. And, that's just another aspect. I mean, in the wake of, I guess what I was criticizing was that like transactionality and people who offer support and solidarity or organizing, but only if they can like get something in return. So yeah, I should have had, some of my stories, there's nice older white people, but not in Depart. It's also hard because you have to create a lot of villains. And just honestly, like as a white author, if you like make any, in this day and age, like if you make anyone villainous who's a non-white character, that's extremely loaded and like kind of best to avoid. So if you kind of want to show like there's this group of people and they're experiencing like threats and danger on all sides, like what I'm going to focus on is people who have structural power. Like even though these are characters and individuals in a story, I'm exploring lots of different systemic trends of oppression. And so there's multiple avenues of that. There's the cops, there's the state violence, there's the far right violence of, the guy with the gun. There's the sabotage that you can find at the hands of even your own queer community. So yeah, they are all white people. That's kind of like, as a white author, I think that is sort of a more responsible choice. So
yeah, you don't want to enforce a negative stereotype about a group that's already targeted.
Yeah,
I see that. I mean, we don't know the age of Officer Levin, I don't think. So, I mean, Officer Levin kind of comes to.
I see Officer Levin is like Gen Z, or I'm Gen X more.
Right.
Than older,
yeah. Gen X is getting older, I should know. But yeah. Yeah. So it's a lot of dynamics to pack into a pretty short novella too, yeah. So thinking, since you are living in Texas and we see a lot in the news, and occasionally people are like, oh, well, that's Texas, whatever, but I also hear that Texas is big from Texans and it's actually pretty diverse. I mean, Houston had a lesbian mayor, right? At one point. I'm confusing that with another city.
No, we
Texas.
haven't.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Okay. I'm off track on that. But it's, Houston isn't Lubbock or Amarillo.
No,
Or some
yeah.
other places, right? You also, but then again, you have Governor Abbott, and you're represented in the Senate by Ted Cruz, and so so what's the mood you feel in your networks of LGBT folks? I mean, it seems like there's a lot to be concerned or angry about lately.
Yeah, it's a very scary time to be trans in Texas. Definitely this summer has felt really different and scary, and just like even when I'm out and about with my kids, like if I'm leaving the inner loop of the city, I've noticed like I'm kind of on guard. I rejoined like a gym this summer, and I've been harassed like 3 or 4 times in the locker room. Just people like and again, I'm sorry, it was all older white women who like saw me from behind and instantly started yelling, like were instantly angry. And all my life I've looked like this, and I've been sort of visibly queer, and they're like, people will be like, why, like, I'm sorry, you're in the wrong restroom, or, oh, this is the women's room, or, but it's like an honest mistake. It's always been like an honest mistake correction. And then I speak, or they take a second look, and they're like, oh, wait, well, maybe, I don't know what this is. But this has been like, I've been like, someone's just started yelling at me. Someone like called security on me while I was peeing in a stall. So that's new. That feels new. And it's kind of freaky. Within the city limits of Houston, like Houston is a plurality. We have a racial plurality here. So this is not a majority white city. They say it's like the most diverse city in the country, depending on how you draw the lines or whatever. It is, I would say it feels way more diverse than any of the cities I lived in the North, like Chicago, Cleveland, Boston, where like there are racial minorities, but like people are very much like in their neighborhood. There's racial segregation here, but it feels much less, and the borders feel more fluid. Like you see more different types of people. So now when I go visit like friends and family in the North, I'm like, wow, it's all white people. Like where we are right now is all white people. And that's like weird compared to living in Houston. So those are things that I love about Houston. Like a lot of my friends, like I said, are in the abortion access fight and are currently still employed, but like, that's now a big question mark. They may be leaving or moving the state, or like I had a friend leave and go to California to become like an abortion doula because that work cannot be done here anymore. So there's like, it's scary. People are thinking about leaving. I have a friend, I have friends who have trans kids. I have a good friend who has a trans son, and he, though just turned 18, but they're all making plans to leave the state. So it's like saying goodbye to people and wondering if you should say. We are legally, we must stay here for 2 years because one of my kids is under a custody order, and we cannot move out of state until she turns 18. But, and after that, we're kind of like, we might see what we can do in 2 years to get out of here.
Yeah, I think I'd seen on Twitter once you were talking about how, not everybody can just up sticks and move. I mean, it feels a little bit privileged to tell everyone in Texas who's queer or trans that you need to move, or a female, or,
Yeah. It's incredibly, we cannot afford to. The cost of living is so different in northern cities and blue state cities. It's so much higher. If you have any kind of like criminal record, you're on probation, you have kids under a custody order. I mean, there's so many, or you have aging family who you need to take care of. You have a social network that like you rely on that you cannot move. Yeah. I get furious when people tell me to leave Texas, even though we're considering it. We're like trying to maybe make plans to do that someday. It would be gut wrenching to leave. It would be horrible. We'd be leaving like our lifelong friends and family behind, and like, I don't know if it will be possible. So yeah, that's a very unhelpful thing to say.
Yeah. What agencies or groups are doing the best work to support LGBT folks in Texas? Because I know like youth, and I mean, even just talking about youth, just to bracket that, it's like the second largest trans youth population of any state in the US, from what I understand.
Oh, we have a great center here called the Montrose Center that does like all kinds of like counseling and housing services for queer youth, and they're awesome. If anyone wants like put their money somewhere, I would recommend the Montrose Center of Houston for sure. And each of our cities has a place like that, you know, which they go visit one in Dallas. It doesn't have great results, but that's, you know, when people are, when all the systems start failing, it's like, that's one of the questions of climate change. It's like, who do you help? Who do you have the capacity to help? And in that case, they've decided to just help people from Dallas.
Yeah, speaking of climate change and climate fiction, so this seems like I mean, it's not entirely new because there are books like Earth Abides, and you know, back in the 50s, but it seems like eco-fiction or climate fiction is a sort of new category. And then you've got that sort of solar punk, more optimistic take on it. I recently read the Monk and Robot novellas by Becky Chambers. Oh yeah, they were like, I can't believe I like this so much. I usually like depressing stuff, but I just feel like, this is cool. People being kind to each other and still having conflict, but you know, what would you, if you were to recommend like books in climate fiction, like for people that are interested in exploring that more, like what do you like in that, or what has influenced you maybe in that kind of writing?
Oh man, yeah.
There's even a literary angle, right? Because I know your Discord was talking about How Beautiful We Were by Imbolo Mbue, which I ended up reading later on, which is heartbreaking, but also amazing. Or Amitabh Ghosh writes stuff. So go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, so both of those were books. I have a climate fiction book club. We've been on hiatus this summer, but we read like a different climate fiction book each month. And we read Amitabh Ghosh's Gun Island, which was excellent. We read Imbolo Mbue's the How Beautiful We Were. That one's like a really, so for me, there's like different categories and purposes that fall under this like climate fiction bubble. And one category that I'm always defending that gets kind of like, people like kind of talk down on it, is just like the importance of literature that grieves and that lets you grieve. It doesn't offer hope. I mean, How Beautiful We Were is about, it's set in a fictional African country village that is polluted. The river that the people subsist off of is polluted terribly by a fictional corporation, but it's, you know, it's ExxonMobil in Nigeria is sort of the basis of the story. And it's just, it doesn't offer hope. It doesn't fix things in the end. It doesn't, you know, tell you, here's how we solve it. You know, it just grieves this horrific thing that happened. And I think that it's really, and it bears witness. And I think that is really important and powerful to engage with books on that level. Another book I think that does that is the Overstory by what's his name, Richard Powers, which is like a 500-page book about trees. And it'll make you cry and it'll make you learn a lot of tree biology. And it's really just grieving like the loss of so many trees and of so many forests. And it follows like, I think like 10 point of view characters and their personal, like their intense personal relationships that they've had with trees over the course of their life, like individual trees, like this magnolia tree in my backyard, or this chestnut tree that grew on my grandpa's farm or whatever. And then all their stories end up converging in the end, which is really, really cool. But the first half of the book feels like a series of short stories about people who love trees. And both of those books I think are really great. So you've got those utopian books. You've got books that, those grieving books. You have books that I think Depart falls in this category, which is like, how do we survive? Like some, you know, kind of bracing yourself, kind of realistic, near future. I mean, the speculative element, maybe not so much, but near future. Let's look at where climate change is headed. Let's really look at what we might be facing in 5, 10, 20 years and think about how are we going to get through it. You know, a lot of those books have really similar themes to Depart. You know, we have to stick together. We have to not abandon one another, not give in to like the forces of fear and fascism and all that stuff. I think that a great example of that is like Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, which also has a ton of like practical survival advice baked in, like how to make acorn bread and, you know, just like how they're surviving on the road. And then there's like far future stuff that is utopian and like we've solved it. Here's how we fixed it. Here's how we live in a way that's sustainable and joyful and kind. And yeah, so I think all those types of stories are useful and important, and we feel all the feelings about climate change and living through mass extinction, and we need literature that reflects all those feelings, the hope and also the despair and everything in between.
Thanks, that's great. You also had an article I wanted to ask about the no, billionaires won't escape to space while the world burns on salon.com. I know you had a lot of buzz. I think I actually discovered your writing when that Twitter thread about why not to worry too much about Elon and Jeff and Richard with their, orbital cities or whatever was going on. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the response to that. And this is funny. I saw that. I'm like, oh, who's this Sim Kern person? Oh, they're an author. Oh, wait, they wrote a queer Jewish climate fiction novella. This is like stuff I'm researching, and yeah.
Yeah, that was my claim to fame. That was my most viral thing ever. So it basically started as a Twitter thread. My spouse works for NASA. He's what's the word? He's an engineer, but he's a flight controller. He's a flight controller with NASA. So, and then during the pandemic, like he was working from home. So just every day on Zoom in his office, I'm just like overhearing and seeing like the day-to-day work that it takes to keep these people in space on the ISS. And it's like so tedious, and like the minutia of like this one little toggle broke on the outside of the spaceship because an ice ball hit it. And now we have to train for 20 hours and spend 6 hours getting in the spacesuits, going outside, doing an EVA to fix this little switch, putting the space, getting back in the airlock, taking the spacesuits off, putting everything away. Thousands of people on the ground are supporting this like mission to fix this one little switch in space. And then all this was kind of happening at the same time that the space rate, Branson did his first space flight, and then Bezos did his first flight up to low Earth orbit like a few weeks later. And people were really there. I think a lot of people really believe that billionaires are going to be living in space, and they're going to have colonies in space and leave the Earth to burn, and they're going to have it so good up there. And that's just not going to happen. And we're also not going to Mars in any of our lifetimes. Like if we're lucky, Artemis gets funded and they're going to spend the next 20 years trying to get astronauts to live on the moon for like a week. That's like realistic in the next 20 years. So we're not
space camping, right?
Yeah, we're not anywhere close to space hotels, so that are in any way enjoyable. And then also Ike had told me about like the process of pooping in space is like a 32-step checklist, and everything floats in space. Like you have to like press your butt to this vacuuming toilet, and things float and get away from you. So the idea that like, billionaires are going to leave for space and have it good, I think that like our science fiction has gotten so convincing, and you watch The Martian and the sci-fi and the effects are so real, and it seems so like detailed, and like, God bless Andy Weir and Kim Stanley Robinson for like writing the most convincing technobabble ever. But they've sort of like a lot of people really believe that like the technobabble has gotten so good that people really believe it's science, and they really think that we're just so close to living in space. It's just not going to happen. So anyways, that was kind of what the thread was about. It was just kind of debunking this idea and kind of making fun of these billionaires for thinking they were going to live in space. And people found it so comforting that Elon Musk and Jeffrey Bezos will die on Earth like the rest of us. So that's my message.
Yeah.
I used to love science fiction so much. And like, I mean, I still do, obviously. I was like a huge Star Trek kid. I love Star Trek. I would love to serve on the USS Enterprise, but for some reason my brand has become like disabusing people of their notions that like space living is gonna be a reality.
Yeah, it's a good reminder. And that, if you think you can like set up all this stuff in space, why not put a good chunk of that effort toward this planet too, right?
Right.
This is a biosphere we're adapted to. It's not trying to kill you all the time. I mean, some of the time it's trying to kill us, but not all the time.
Yeah. Gravity, radiation shielding, water.
Right. Yeah, I think you talked about
important
Scott
stuff.
Kelly's year in space and how much extra radiation he was exposed to in the articles. Yeah, I reread it last night. I was like, oh yeah, this is important reminder. Sci-fi is great fiction. When it's space operas or whatever. It's fiction though. It's being that you work with rather heavy material in a lot of your writing, what sort of things do you do to keep your head clear or to feel grounded? Do you have self-care advice for us or whatever?
I work out a lot. I mean, that's been really helping. I swim, I do yoga. I'm low-key Buddhist, and I try to like meditate and be in the present moment and all this stuff. And my kids, like, I think without my kids, I would be way more like depressed, but like, because they're here, like I have to remember to find joy in my short existence that I get to have as like a conscious entity on this rock that's hurtling through the vast, inhospitable void of space. And I'm made of stardust, and I should just enjoy the sunset sometimes, and not despair. So yeah, those are kind of the things.
Which reminds me of the listener.
Yeah.
You wrapped up that story. That's such I love the way everything kind of came together in that story in the end. And I hope some people here, or people who watch this video when it's up as a recording, get that collection and read it. It's really good. So we're almost done, but I would like to hear a little bit about the books you have forthcoming.
Sure.
Tell us about Seeds and your other.
Yeah. So Seeds for the Swarm is coming out in November 1st. This one's young adult, so it's more plot driven. It's basically it's kind of playing with the like Ender's Game type trope of like a school for genius kids who are going to save the world. But the college kids end up spying on their professors and the board and figuring out that the school's billionaire backers have a very nefarious plot in motion, and they turn on the school leadership, and it's very eat the rich. And it's got nanotechnology. It's more fantastical sci-fi. It's not as realistic. There's like nanobot swarms and all this like more far future stuff. So I think that one's a bit more like of a fun romp than my other books. And then I have in fall of 2023, I have a book coming out called The Free People's Village. That one is set in, it's coming out with Levine Carrito, which is a great publisher. I'm really excited to work with them. It's set in an alternate timeline, 2020, where Al Gore had won the 2000 election and declared war on climate, and 9/11 never happened. And so there's been this war on climate, and Democrats have been totally in control for 20 years. And it's kind of taking Democrats at their word and saying, okay, like, let's say you enacted all these policies you said you would want to enact if you didn't have the rotating villain, if you like really had control and you could just the Democrats' wildest fantasies of climate policy. And sort of the thesis is it's still just like surfacey greenwashing. It's like a greenwashing kind of eco-consumerism is really big, and things look different, but under the surface, it's still oil. Like they never stopped the fossil fuel industry. And the things like cap and trade and like offering carbon incentives, like it's very like in the Inflation Reduction Act is like an example of this, like the kickbacks and tax incentives for going green are benefiting the wealthy, which ends up making like poor Black communities like a scapegoat. So that's the world. And then there's a queer punk band that's like living in a warehouse. And they find out their warehouse is going to be demolished to make room for this like green hyperway. It's like an electromagnetic highway that goes out to the suburbs, the white wealthy suburbs. So they start fighting to save their warehouse, and they end up connecting to a Black-led coalition that's fighting to save this neighborhood that's in danger of being destroyed. That's going to be sacrificed for this hyperway. And so they end up at the center of this like revolution, basically, that is centering racial justice in climate justice work, which is something I believe in. And there's a love story. It's a love story. So
That sounds fascinating.
I'm excited about that one.
Yeah.
That's fall of 23 though.
Okay. Yeah, the timeline for publication, you know, done right. It's a lot of steps leading up to stuff. That's great. This has been super. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
I'll let you know when the recording is up. So if you want to promote it to any folks you know, or put it on your site or anything like that. But it's been really good to have you join us. Thanks for writing what you write, and yeah, strength and persistence to you. And
Thank you.
it's
Yeah, it was great to be here. Thank you everyone for coming.
yeah, and thanks to everybody who could join us today, and to the Speculative Wisdom folks. I'll probably be sending out a survey in a month or so about future plans, what we're going to read next year, stuff like that. So we'll be in touch with you. But
cool. I'd love to read along with some of your stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'll make sure you get the link if you want to, you know, see what we're doing and so on. Pop in if you feel like discussing something. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend.